On January 18th, Warner announced the home media release of Justice League, which was covered by the digital bits. Not only did we see the Blu-ray cover art, we also learned what bonus features would be present, and more importantly, that an extended cut of any kind would be absent. In this video, the first formal installment of the new show Talking Blu, I am joined by Tom Connors.
Hello.
And from the digital bits, Bill Hunt.
Hello, everybody.
And Tim Salmons.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Today, we will begin by giving you a brief recap on Justice League, before we start talking about the Blu-ray release itself. Then we'll discuss if we'll ever see the Snyder Cut, that we will be seeing a 3D release, the cover art, and finally, any other recommendations. To start us off, Tom, why don't you do a quick recap on all things Justice League?
Alright, well, we've covered Justice League in many previous videos. Long story short is that after Batman v Superman, Warner Brothers lost faith in Zack Snyder and his vision for the DC universe. After screening Snyder's cut for the studio executives, Joss Whedon was called in to do rewrites and reshoots. Due to the tragic suicide of Snyder's daughter, Snyder stepped away from the production and Joss Whedon helmed the reshoots, delivering a new cut, which the studio mandated be less than 2 hours so they could fit in more screenings per day. Due to the production constraints, it was also released with special effects that ordinarily would have been considered incomplete. Sold out theaters wasn't a worry, though, as it opened to merely 93.8 million domestically, and at the time of this recording, it has only made 656 million worldwide, meaning it remains on track to become the least grossing and least successful installment of the DC Universe, as the DC Cinematic Universe is now called. Gentlemen, we're brought here today on this first show of Talking Blu with the Digital Bits because you guys announced last week that the Justice League Blu-ray was on its way, and you also showed the cover art along with a few other things that came in the press release. So let's get right into this. Andre, let's start with you.
Well, I really have a question, and that's a question for you guys at the Digital Bits. Why on earth is this movie released digitally 1 month before it is released on physical media?
The actual announcement is that Justice League is coming on Blu-ray combo, Blu-ray 3D combo, DVD, and 4K combo on March 13th. And then the digital release, as Andre said, is expected on February 13th, a full month ahead. Part of the reason for that, honestly, is that the studios are trying to move consumers toward digital. That's where they would like everyone to be. I think they would rather build that future market rather than continuing to serve discs over time. So they want to give that sort of early advantage to the digital file. I think that's what the evidence suggests. And then the other thing is, discs take time to author and replicate and produce and ship and get into stores. Whereas once you have a digital file ready, you can just, send it out to your distributors and up it goes.
Tim?
As far as the release itself, I'm not so concerned so much with cover art and things, which we'll get into in a minute, but also the content of it, being that this was such a tumultuous production plagued with problems. It's a shame that we won't get to know more about it right off the bat with an initial release, but who knows what the future holds.
We should mention that what is going to be included on the Blu-ray versions are 11 behind-the-scenes featurettes, which will probably total something on the order of about 90 minutes, all of which basically are produced by the internal sort of EPK crew, the press crew that follows these things. And then if you buy the Walmart exclusive version, it will have one deleted scene on it, but that deleted scene isn't included in any other version. It's basically going to be marketing-driven material. You're definitely not going to get a look at what really happened behind the scenes.
Yeah. Because there was a time, not too long ago, when movies would have these really extensive bonus features that were practically film school in a box. There were many examples of this. One of my favorite examples is the 2004 Punisher movie, where all the bonus features, like you watch those, and you've practically been to film school. And the same can be said for the initial release of Terminator 2, as well as many others. Why don't we get bonus features like that anymore? Why do we get this PR marketing bullcrap instead?
I think it is about control, and it's also about the amount of money that's required. And the simple fact is, they don't need to create those kind of extras anymore to sell this product. In the early days of DVD and Blu-ray, in order to get customers to buy these films, particularly catalog films, you really had to create all this extra content that really got people excited. But now, there's a younger audience that just really doesn't care about most of that stuff. What they really want to see is the movie. There really are a lot of people who don't even watch any of the content on these bonus features. anymore. And I think they've realized, look, DVD is a mature format, Blu-ray is becoming a mature format, younger people are trending toward digital. They don't need to create this content anymore to sell it.
Now, on the subject of the Zack Snyder cut or an extended cut of Justice League, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. They did release both versions of Exorcist 4, but in that case, the other version of Exorcist 4 was already done when they started filming the alternate version. This is a bit different.
That was a time when the idea of having different versions of a movie was still kind of relatively rare. But today it's common practice on these big blockbuster films to have extensive reshoots. They plan for it in the very beginning. The schedules are so tight to produce these things and release them that they sometimes start shooting with a script that's not even fully complete, and then they finish shooting, they start putting it all together in post and see what they've got and go, oh, maybe we needed this scene, maybe we need that scene. And they just automatically plan for another month's worth of reshoots later. It's just built in now to the process. And so you naturally have this kind of situation where the final movie that you get, transforms radically sometimes in that process.
And also, you have situations like the Lord of the Rings movies, for example. They went into making those movies knowing full well that they were going to do big, elaborate, extras-laden releases of them. That the studios agreed with them on that, and they planned for it, and they shot documentaries and included stuff. Some stuff they saved for later, some stuff they put out, which they could still put extra stuff out if they want to. But that really doesn't happen anymore with major studios. It's become a niche thing, and as much as we'd like to see major releases get these big special edition releases with alternate cuts and deleted scenes and things like that, it just isn't feasible to them because they don't perceive their audience to be people that really care about this stuff. And also what Bill was saying, that it just costs them extra money that they don't feel that they need to be spending in the first place.
There's also an element that with a controversial production, sometimes you don't want to do that extensive dive into what happened immediately with that first release. Sometimes you need the perspective of a year or two to be able to look back and go, oh, okay, here's what really happened. Because the rush to get this product out, the home video product out, after theatrical release, those windows are shrinking. So sometimes there just isn't time. These projects are so big that the moment they're done shooting and finishing post, the filmmakers and the cast are all off to promotion all around the world. They don't have a lot of time to record commentaries and record behind-the-scenes stuff.
Okay, now we've heard various stories left and right on whether or not the Zack Snyder cut was actually really finished. And that's kind of one thing that's been really debated hotly online, and you've had a few different parties weigh in stating that the movie was done a lot more than you think and all these other things, but I'm not so sure that a lot of those people that are saying that are being specific enough about certain effect shots and stuff like that to where they're not bringing up the fact that, oh yeah, it was done, but it's still going to need another 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, $20 million worth of work to finish it. I think that's the big thing here that most people aren't really concentrating on when it comes to this Zack Snyder cut, even though Zack Snyder himself kind of fielded this a little bit more here this last week over a tweet.
You also have a situation where, talking about the original Superman movie, where Superman and Superman 2 were shot simultaneously. The first movie came out, right. It was very successful, but Superman 2, even though Richard Donner shot big portions of it, most of it was reshot and released under Richard Lester's version. And you have people that clamored to see Richard Donner's cut of it many years later, and they made what is mostly Richard Donner's cut, but it's not quite what he intended. And the reason is they just didn't shoot enough. So that may be the case with this movie. The original director dropped out, and they probably didn't get everything that they need. But they still could if they wanted to, but it's very doubtful that they would want to spend any more money on this.
Right, that's the big thing, yeah.
Yeah, here's the thing with the Snyder Cut. It does exist, but only in a work print form. So it's mostly a locked version of Snyder's vision, but it is incomplete. It is not color timed, it does not have the special effects completed. It does have the JXL score, so it can in principle be finished, but that's going to require tens of millions to finish up these special effects, to work on the score and the color timing. And finishing up would require bringing back JXL, it would require bringing back Zack Snyder, and that's unlikely to happen because the relationship between him and the DC department isn't all that great right now. So that is one thing. So if we are going to get any extended version at any point in the future, then we are talking about an extended Joss Whedon version. That is more likely to happen, but I still think even that is unlikely to happen.
We have to ask, does Joss Whedon or Zack Snyder want to come back and do that?
Exactly.
Ultimately, the most important reason to have a Zack Snyder extended cut or a Joss Whedon extended cut is because those filmmakers really believe that one should be created and seen by the fans. And if they're not interested, you kind of have to respect that. The idea that there is a locked rough cut of a longer version that Zack Snyder produced, that process happens in every movie. I mean, every movie has a rough cut. They always get shaved down, whittled down to the demands of the studio, to maybe think something isn't working. That's very common, so there isn't always a reason to go back and do it unless the will is there with all parties.
Yeah, that's exactly right, because Snyder definitely doesn't want to come back. And I doubt very much that Whedon wants to come back to do an extended version of his cut either, because the simple fact of the matter is that this movie is kind of an embarrassment to everyone involved. No one is happy with it. And it appears that Warner kind of had the attitude going in that this is just something we have to power through, get the shit out, be done with it, and let's move on to greener pastures. I don't think that anyone wants to go back and do an extended version of it. Furthermore, the extended versions of Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad, they were both controversial for different reasons. For Batman v Superman, it was a matter of why did you release the theatrical version at all? For Suicide Squad, it was why did you release the extended version? Why this double dip? So there was like some audience backlash in the case of both of those. So maybe they just decided that, you know what, let's do it the Wonder Woman way, of just releasing one version of the movie. Maybe it's not the superior version, but this is a movie that no one is really happy with, so let's just let Sleeping Dogs lie and be done with it and move on.
Right.
I think Warner Brothers is conscious of the fact, and some of this is their own fault. The truth is a lot of this is their own fault. But this is a case where I don't think they're going to please anyone. No matter what they do, there's going to be people who will not be happy with it.
Zack Snyder's tragedy aside and the studio politics and all, one thing I think people lose sight on is Zack's vision is what got us here in the first place. And even though we know Joss had a lot to do with this, Tim brought up a good example with Superman 2 and Richard Lester and Richard Donner, and I believe Richard Lester had to direct at least like 60% of the film to get credit.
Yeah, it was something like that. It was a big chunk of it.
Joss Whedon has been a part of this project for a while now, and he supposedly worked on the script with Zack Snyder prior to this whole thing changing up. So, of course, it already had a little bit of his tone in there. So, in the end, one could almost say that he probably had a lot more to do with this version than Zack Snyder did. Then again, you also have to look at it as we're already kind of getting Zack Snyder's version in a lot of ways because there's very few changes or whatever here and there, but he's still technically the director.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, too, that Zack Snyder has been on this project for a long time. I mean,
Right.
I think he was hired to direct Justice League in April of 2014.
Well, he went right from Batman v Superman to Justice League, if I remember correctly.
Right, that's a long time to be on a project. And then the other thing we can't overlook is the fact that, during production, his daughter died. That's a big thing. That's got to be a hard thing for him to deal with, and especially as it's tied to this project, his experience and his involvement. I mean, I've met Zack Snyder. He's one of the nicest guys in the world. He seems like a really genuine, down-to-earth guy. And I have to imagine this project was a difficult, long, tumultuous thing for him to be involved in. So the idea that he would want to go back and do a director's cut, I just don't see it anytime soon. If this initial release of Justice League on Blu-ray 4K digital is a huge seller, then they might go, oh, this is a title that people seem to be interested in, and maybe we can come back and exploit it again.
Oh yeah, we'll see the extended cut for Christmas.
Right, that's exactly right. If they see a business reason, a profit-making reason to come back to this, they will. Or if Zack Snyder says, or Joss Whedon says, I'd like to come back and do another version, then you might see it. But it's not going to happen anytime soon, and I think the odds that this is going to be a huge seller on disc, it'll sell well. These films always do, but, I don't know that the studio's going to be looking to revisit it anytime soon.
Yeah, I agree completely. I don't think that we will ever get either Joss Whedon's extended version or Snyder's director's cut. At best, and this is even stretching it, they might get some uncredited filmmaker to just assemble an extended version and release it as an extended cut. I can see that happening in the hypothetical event that the current release is going to be a massive hit. But that's about it. I think the most likely scenario is that the version we now have is the version we're going to be stuck with. Because they release so few deleted scenes that you can't even make a fan edit out of it.
Right.
Certainly not a longer one.
Yeah, if we get anything, it'll just be the version that was cut down to 2 hours that we saw in theaters.
Also, consider that those deleted scenes have a certain kind of value in that, depending on how much material hasn't been used, they can sit on it, and if they need it for a future film, maybe they can incorporate it into a future film. That's a resource that the studio, the filmmakers, can mine for future projects. Plus, they also know if they put it out on Blu-ray, all these deleted scenes, every fan editor in the world is going to make their own Zack Snyder cut on YouTube.
Yep, exactly.
And also, I think that the only way to make, or the only way to see a pure version of a Zack Snyder superhero film, and Tom was talking about this with regards to Joss Whedon being writing in the script writing stages from the very beginning, is that all you got to do is go back and watch Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman, and that's the kind of movie you would have gotten with Justice League when Justice League came out, if he had had total control of it from the very beginning, which he did not. So
right.
No matter what, it was never going to be totally his movie, tone-wise.
The shame of it is, when you look back at all those films that he was involved with, I actually really liked Man of Steel. You would have to argue that Man of Steel was the film of this series that he was involved with where he probably had the least studio interference, because it hadn't come out yet and there was no negative reaction, all that kind of stuff. I look at Man of Steel and I go, that film could be 15 minutes shorter, but I will say I really liked that film. The problem is that the studio was making bad decisions from the beginning. I really, really liked Man of Steel. But after Man of Steel, the last thing I wanted was Batman vs. Superman. I wanted Man of Steel 2, and then a Batman movie, and then you put them together. But they just rushed it. Warner Brothers and DC wanted to have what Marvel had, but they wanted it yesterday, and they just rushed the whole process.
There was someone else who also wanted Man of Steel 2 instead of Batman v Superman. Right. Zack Snyder.
Yeah, he was right. I love Man of Steel. I'm a champion of that film. It's not perfect, but they just got so much right that it's like it was an opportunity that they could have built on, and they just made so many bad choices from that point.
Yep, they sure did.
And you want to talk about lost opportunities. The one lost opportunity as far as Justice League is concerned, ignoring Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon, is what George Miller's Justice League could have been. That to me is a definite lost opportunity, and I would love to have seen what that could have been. It could have been good, could have been bad, but I would have loved to have seen it. Regardless.
Yeah, me too. It could have been very, very interesting.
It definitely would have been more interesting than the movie we ended up getting.
One thing we don't get to see anymore is a 3D release very often when it comes to movies. Even though they get a 3D release in theaters, it's hit and miss when it comes to video, because it seems that a lot of these bigger studios are phasing the 3D out, unfortunately, for people like me who are enthusiasts. But luckily with Justice League, we actually do get a 3D release.
It's true. The interesting thing is that Warner Brothers is releasing Justice League on Blu-ray 3D like widely day and date. Typically these days what happens, with major studios at least, is that they save the 3D, and if they release it at all, they release it as a retail exclusive here in the US. They still release 3D more commonly overseas, but here in the US they tend to keep it as a retail exclusive if they do it at all. And, that's frustrating if you're a 3D enthusiast. Part of the problem with 3D is that it's not so much the studio's decision to phase out Blu-ray 3D, because, as you say, 3D is still very, very common in theaters and very popular in theaters. The problem is that on the electronic side, the consumer electronics manufacturers that sell TVs, they bet big on 3D as the next thing after regular HD, and those TVs didn't sell well at all, to the extent that enthusiasts bought them, but they were hoping for a wider audience, and the problem is that those glasses are expensive. Some people are sensitive, having a reaction to the glasses. The glasses are easily damaged. It was a whole complicated thing, and so 3D at home didn't really take off on the electronic side. So what the manufacturers did is said, okay, we'll set that aside and we'll come back to 3D. Now they're all working in the lab on autostereoscopic displays, which means 3D without glasses. And I've seen demonstrations, and every year at CES they get better, and they will crack it. At some point in the next 5-6 years they'll crack it. But right now they're happy to just say, okay, we'll set that aside and we'll go for 4K. 4K and high dynamic range is what everyone is behind right now. And so that's why you've seen 3D kind of take a pause. But the good news is Blu-ray 3D itself, a display format agnostic system. which means that once they have auto-stereoscopic displays 5-6 years from now, you should be able to go back and play all your Blu-ray 3D discs and still get that quality.
Right, plus you have the luxury if you have, like, say, the PS4 and have VR, you can watch your 3D Blu-rays that way still. There's a lot of projectors that do 3D. So hopefully that'll kind of keep the niche market alive until then, because, I've got my fingers crossed on that. But yeah, otherwise I've had to import a lot of movies, as you were saying, just because of that. And we also have a situation where recently, when you announced some information, I believe, about The Last Jedi, we have yet to hear about a 3D version, which was similar to The Force Awakens, which it didn't come till almost a year later, at least 7 months or so after the initial release, they finally brought it out. And then again, just with Rogue One, it was retail only.
It's worth pointing out that it's up for pre-order on a lot of retail sites, and here in the States, there's no pre-order for a 3D version yet. Now, there is a pre-order for a 3D version in Europe, so the question is are they going to hold it back and release it a year later as a collector's edition? Or are they going to give it to a retailer as an exclusive? Some other like Target or Best Buy or whatever it'll just appear on their website. Because that's the weird thing about these retail exclusives. The studios contractually are not allowed to talk about them because the retailer wants to be able to promote it in all their circulars and stuff.
Like we just seen with Blade Runner, yeah.
That's exactly right. The press release will come out and it'll have no mention of 3D, and then you just have to wait and see if one shows up somewhere for sale.
It should be noted, though, for any Europeans watching, that this is mostly a US-specific problem. In Europe, you have generally the 3D release comes day and date with the ordinary Blu-ray release. So that market is going stronger in Europe at the very least than it is in the US.
And it's worth adding on to that a lot of times those European Blu-ray 3D releases are region zero, or they're all region. Not always, but sometimes, which means that if, U.S. consumers very often will import those discs from Europe and can still enjoy some of those films. It's hard to figure out kind of what their pattern is. They seem to sort of be trying to figure it out.
Yeah, unless it's a Marvel movie anymore, it doesn't seem like you can bet on it. That's pretty much it when it comes to Disney. Most of the Pixar movies have, too, but other than that, it's really hard to gauge whether or not they're going to do it or not.
Very true, yeah.
Warner Brothers seems to be the only one thus far that I can say, hands down, if there's been a 3D release in theaters, you will get it on Blu-ray, it seems. They've been pretty consistent, so. This Blade Runner situation is the first time that I know of that they did a retail exclusive 3D version. This will be something I'm sure we'll see a lot going forward, right, Bill?
Yeah, I think you're going to see more and more the big studios are moving away from 3D. I mean, Disney's already announced that they're just not going to be doing 3D very much anymore. I believe they basically said they're unlikely to be doing a lot of 3D unless, a retail exclusive or whatever the case might be. So I think you're going to start seeing other studios doing that too. By the same token, there are a lot of little independent studios that have picked up the mantle on 3D and are still releasing sort of older films and kind of curiosities in 3D. So there's a niche market. There's a niche market for 3D, and it'll continue, and it'll probably sort of limp along until we get these new displays, whether they're 4K or 8K or whatever, and then I think you'll see a big renaissance in 3D eventually at home.
Yeah, I just want my Friday the 13th Part 3 in real 3D. I hate the anaglyph version.
I was thinking about that myself.
We got Jaws, now we just need... Speaking of Blu-ray releases and stuff like that, I know Andre is a big, I wouldn't say fan because you don't like usually what they put out, but you're a fan of making your own disc artwork because the cover artwork for almost any movie that comes out nowadays is horrible crap. And Justice League is a prime example of that from the reaction it's getting from most people. So Andre, go ahead with this topic. I know it's a hot topic for you.
Yeah, absolutely, because basically I really love my physical Blu-ray collection. And I'm such a perfectionist that I don't necessarily do covers myself, but I do download custom covers, which are made in the same style of the DVD covers of yesterday and VHS covers of yesteryear, basically using the theatrical art or other really nice key art or even Mondo posters. But on Blu-rays, on the official releases, you usually have this poorly made Photoshop rush jobs that look like an intern put together in their lunch break.
Not wrong.
Now granted, it's not that bad on this Justice League version, because here you have like some proper art, I guess, even though it's nothing like the posters we saw earlier, which were all better than this, even though none of them were that good either. But here you then have like this weird image of them all standing straight up and down, and the colors don't really match anything seen in the movie at all.
I will say the Alex Ross art was decent. But the
Yeah,
rest
that
of them
was
sucked.
decent. It wasn't great, but it was decent. But it certainly was a hell of a lot better than what we see on this cover right here, with colors all out of whack. Like, this is like marketing the movie under a false flag, because the movie doesn't look like that.
You sure? It did to me.
It's very deliberate, too, because I think one of the concerns about these DC films is they've been too dark, and so I guarantee some marketing person said, oh, we need to brighten everything up so it looks fun, and that's why you got that.
I was going to say, it looked to me like it had that saturated color palette just like the movie.
Trying to Marvelize them, in other words.
Right, exactly. But the reason this happens is it's two things. First of all, while the classic movie posters and the movie art and the hand-painted posters, while that really appeals to film enthusiasts, apparently the numbers show it has no appeal whatsoever for younger audiences. They go to a video store and they see those old, kind of looking old-style posters and they go, that's an old film, it just doesn't have that same appeal. But the other reason it's complicated is because a lot of times when the actors are hired to be in these films, they have contractual approval over the images that are used of them in all marketing. So basically, some of these posters, you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 different actors that have to sign off on their likeness. And so what you tend to get is these sort of dumbed down images.
Floating heads.
Right, that's exactly right. A few years ago, it was all designed to appeal to the average consumer walking down a store shelf. You wanted something big and bold with a big title.
We had the orange and blue motif for a while.
Right. You wanted something that drew the eye. And the cool thing is a lot of these little independent studios have gotten around that by creating the dual-sided art so you can switch. So the other side has got like the original vintage art, all that stuff. And then, the side that is there visibly when you go to the store is, the more compromised art. Or it might be, in the case of like Shout and Scream, they're doing like really nice new art. So it's still attractive, but it still has kind of a classy look to it.
But you get a choice at least.
You get a choice at least, yeah. But that's why that happens with major studios.
I think this is to show parents that this isn't the dark and brooding DC universe that we've seen so far. I know to Andre it wasn't a fair representation of the movie, but what I was getting to is it does to me in a sense that it's showing the parents that, look, we got this fun, exciting movie that your kids are going to love. It's colorful. It's got superheroes in it. You may not like it, but they will, kind of thing. Because like I said in my review, this would have been what my 10 or 12-year-old self's favorite movie because it was basically a big screen version of Super Friends. But now, me seeing this, especially what they did to build up to this, that's where the injustice, pun, comes in because we weren't given a proper finish to the story that we've lived up to this point, and the tone was not earned, the shift change was not earned, the shift in the characters was not earned. It did not feel organic to what we've seen to this point. Regardless, they could have found a way to organically try and see, because Wonder Woman was kind of the start of that. It's like, okay, Wonder Woman wasn't as dark as the other movies, but it wasn't nearly as light and bright as Justice League. So they should have found another happy medium in between there, I think, if you guys get what I'm saying.
I totally do, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen this film yet. I
haven't either.
The last DC film I saw in the theaters was Batman vs. Superman, and I disliked that so much that I didn't go see Suicide Squad. I waited for home video. The same thing with Wonder Woman. And while the extended cut of Batman vs. Superman was interesting in some ways, Suicide Squad was flat out, straight up terrible. I don't know how that happened. I don't know how you make the Joker a really terrible, uninteresting, also-ran character, but somehow they managed to do it. But, I waited for home video for Wonder Woman, which I really liked. I really quite liked, and I just figured the same thing with this one. And the beauty of it is that now that they've got 4K Ultra HD, you can legit have a theater quality experience at home if you have a nice setup, so I don't necessarily mind waiting to watch these things at home now.
I'm with Bill. I saw Batman vs. Superman in theaters and did not like it at all. I did go see Suicide Squad just to punish myself, but I was mildly curious about it to see if maybe they could fix all of the problems that they had with the last movie, and they didn't. It just got worse the second time around. So as a consequence, I did not go see Justice League in the theater, and I haven't seen the film yet. But it is interesting. I have seen Wonder Woman. I waited for that to come out on video before I saw it, and I loved it. I think I liked it a lot more than Bill did. And it's interesting looking at the cover art, to get back to the cover art, is that it's interesting that Wonder Woman is now front and center as opposed to Batman or Superman or anything like that. And that's an obvious choice.
Oh, yeah.
Because Wonder Woman is arguably their most popular character, which is saying something because, for many years, Batman and Superman were their most popular characters. And now Wonder Woman is
Oh, and I love that they put her right in the front. You're right. It's like it's kind of Warner and DC's way of reminding you, hey, remember how much you liked Wonder Woman? Here you go. Here, check this one out. Maybe you'll like this one too. And it's bait and switch a little bit, but it's funny.
Well, they made sure she was front and center in all the advertising as well, and that still wasn't enough to drive people into the theaters. Well, speaking of things that we like or didn't like, real quick here, is there anything, Tim and Bill, that you've seen lately that you really love or you want to warn the customers to kind of avoid until either later when it's cheaper, maybe?
Definitely pick up Blade Runner 2049. That movie is beautiful, and people accuse it of being too long. I personally think the length of it is justified, and I didn't feel the length at all because I was so absorbed in it, but I think that's a beautiful disc, and Bill reviewed it over at the site, and he gave it high marks as well. That's a great 4K disc to pick up. Bill, anything you want to add to that?
Oh, yeah, I would definitely say Blade Runner 2049, especially the 4K disc, is just superb. I mean, I think it was shot in 3.4K open gate, and it's just beautiful. The cinematography is extraordinary, and the visuals, especially with high dynamic range, it just pops off the screen, and there's so much depth. It really is a tremendous experience visually, and I think it's a pretty darn good film as well. And then for me, I've also been watching the recently released Christopher Nolan collection in 4K, which has Dunkirk and Interstellar and the Batman films and a few others, and those are all very good. And I would say G-Kids and Shout Factory have gone back and they're re-releasing all of the Studio Ghibli anime titles, all the animated films, directed by Hayao Miyazaki and some others. And what they've done is they've actually taken all the best extras both here and in Japan, and they've given you the great picture quality and sound quality, and they've fixed some things that were wrong with the Disney releases, bad subtitle tracks and things. They fixed all that. So those are tremendous. If you're an American fan of those films, those are great. Let's see, I'm also right now going through Funimation's Speed Racer, the complete series Blu-ray, which has not only the American version in Blu-ray of Speed Racer, but the original Japanese version, Mach Go Go Go, on Blu-ray with the original Japanese audio and English translation subtitles. So if you're a fan of that show, which I've been my entire life, to go back and see the way that show was represented in Japan originally is really fascinating. And I guess finally, the last title I would highlight is I am eager to crack into Indicator and Powerhouse Films released a trio of Ray Harryhausen Blu-ray box sets that are absolutely terrific. 2 Harryhausen box sets and then a box set of the Sinbad trilogy, which Harryhausen was involved in. And I've got those sitting on my shelf, and the transfers are all pretty good with one or two exceptions, I think. But they're just loaded with extras, and so I'm dying to crack into those.
And also I'll add that to my list is that I recently saw the Severin Films release of the Amicus collection, which contains Asylum, The Beast Must Die, and Now the Screaming Starts. 3 great Amicus movies, and they did a bang-up job with that box set. Unfortunately, it was limited to 3,500 units, and then it's sold out, but I believe some retailers still have copies of it, so definitely if you're a horror fan, that's definitely a box set you want to pick up as quick as you can before you can't get it anymore. So,
by the way, one thing I would add here is that Tim and I make no other recommendations to you guys who are out there listening to this thing. Get yourself a Blu-ray player that has all-region capability. If you're a serious cinephile and serious fan of movies, get yourself an all-region Blu-ray player, because there's so much good content being released internationally that's not being released here. I'm telling you, there's a lot of great stuff out there that you can get from Amazon UK or Amazon Canada or France or Japan. Great stuff. I highly recommend it, because if you're a cinephile, I mean, it might cost you $50 extra to get a modified player, or you can buy aftermarket mods for some players that are $50 to $100, but I'm telling you, if you're a film fan, it's worth doing.
I will say I have one, it's iVid. I don't use it that often, but it wasn't very expensive and it works for me. And a perfect example is I know Tim and I just picked up a Silver Bullet from overseas that just come out this week too. That's another example of a movie that didn't come out here yet.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, there's a lot of content out there. And the good thing about 4K is 4K has no regions. So all you have to do is make sure that it's got audio or subtitles in the language that you require. And you can import a 4K disc from all over the world, but Blu-ray still has region codes. So even though sometimes it'll say it has a certain region code on the box, but it actually is all region. Some distributors do that. But if you really want to watch all kinds of great stuff that's not here, that's the way to do it.
And there's also, I'm looking at 2 discs right now that are available from Arrow Video. Oh, they're available here, but they're not very good releases on Blu-ray. The Coffee and Foxy Brown available through Arrow Video are great picture quality, loaded with extras, whereas I believe Olive Films put those two out here in the U.S., and they're practically bare bones. There's nothing on them. So definitely, if you're fans of the blaxploitation movies, and especially those two in particular, I would recommend getting those. And Arrow Video, especially their Arrow Academy line, for deep-seated film fans, their releases are Criterion quality, if not better. I think I talked about this on the previous podcast that I did, but The Apartment, they just put that out, and they did a brand new 4K restoration of that, and it is a beautiful disc, and tons of extra content, and a book comes in with it in a nice slipcase. They do really great work. And also Arrow Video has also been coming into the US, so even if you don't own a region-free player, there's many titles of theirs that you can get right now that if you want, believe The Apartment is one of them.
What's interesting too is we have to give shout-outs to a lot of the other independent studios, Kino and Twilight Time, and I mean there's lots of different studios. Sometimes what happens with these little independent companies is they license the rights to release a film on Blu-ray for a limited time in a limited quantity, and they'll do their best to create a few extras and maybe to try to get a new transfer if they can, but sometimes what happens is that first release that comes out on disc sells really well, but it's kind of bare bones. But what that does then is, then that company loses the rights and they go to some other company, but the other company sees, oh wow, a lot of people really bought that title and it sold well. So then they get the rights and then they push harder to get a new transfer, or to get new elements for the film, or to be able to create new extras because they can justify it because the other company's proven that there's a market. And the studio, conversely, will go, oh wow, such and such a company sold, this many copies. Maybe it is worth going and doing a brand new transfer and making that available. And so each of these companies, even though sometimes you get these releases that aren't ideal, that aren't optimal, you're starting to see these little films kind of come out again, and then they come out like a year later in a slightly better version. So overall, the quality of these things is getting better and better. I know it's frustrating sometimes to go, oh, do I want to get the Twilight version, or do I want to get the Kino version, or do I want to get the Indicator version, or the Arrow version? But the good news is that process means the quality gets better and better over time, and you tend to get like a really, really high quality releases over time. And so I have to give them all credit for the effort to do that, because without the companies doing those first couple of versions, it wouldn't happen. It's almost like we're back to the Laserdisc days where the main studios are doing some interesting work, but it's really the independents that are carrying the ball. The companies like Criterion and Shout and Twilight and Kino and all these others, there's so many. In that sense, this is a great time to be a film fan.
Two questions to you guys with all of these smaller indie distributors. There are two movies that I'm desperate to get on Blu-ray that I've been looking for years, and I haven't found them yet. Do you know of anyone who have any plans about releasing the 2000 movie Chopper or Ripley's Game?
I don't. Generally what I find with these independent studios is, they have a list of titles that they think would be good releases and that they would like to release, and what they try to do is they contact the studios and they go down their list and they go, okay, what are the condition of the elements you have? Do you have new elements? Do you have fresh elements? Is the film in good condition? Can you easily pull it? Can we do that affordably? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes it's no. And so when it's no, then they hold off and they wait until the studio just naturally, through their cycle of restoration and preservation, creates a new transfer, and then they'll jump on it. But the other thing that happens sometimes too, though, is a lot of these independent films or these smaller films, they are part of catalogs that have been sold and bought and resold and bought, and so the rights are confusing and no one maybe is necessarily sure who owns the rights to a certain title. Or it might be that you know who owns the rights to the title, but nobody knows where the elements are. They went missing, or they're in some vault somewhere, and they're in somebody's house or in somebody's attic, and you just don't know. So it makes these things complicated. There are a lot of titles. I mean, perfect example is a title that I really like, a Sony title called Thunderheart with Val Kilmer. I'm a huge fan of that film. I can't for the life of me figure out why it's not on Blu-ray, because it would be an obvious choice, you'd think, but it happens like that sometimes. Titles that you would never expect that you'd see on Blu-ray are coming out on Blu-ray, and then the titles that are the obvious ones, you go, wow, why isn't that out? It's complicated is the answer.
So the wait continues.
The wait continues.
While you were talking, I was doing a little research. Ripley's Game, I believe the rights to that were owned by Warner Brothers at one time, maybe even New Line. So there's a good chance that if anybody puts that out on Blu-ray, it's going to be them, and it's probably going to be through the Warner Archive, would be my guess. So I would keep a watch there.
We should say a word about Warner Archive. They are doing some amazing stuff. They kind of have a small team. The list of titles that they're given access to tends to depend on what other branches of the studio, what other divisions don't want to exploit. But there's a bit of exciting news which came out recently, which is that Warner Archive is finally convinced the studio to let them do Batman the Animated Series on Blu-ray. They're working on that now, and it's coming out next year. And I can't wait. And there are a number of titles like that they are working on. So, yeah, you never know. Those guys go after some really interesting stuff, and they do the best they can. So they deserve to be supported.
Yeah, so everyone take note of that.
And it also seems that Warner Brothers seems to be a little more lenient about sub-licensing. They recently announced Shout Factory again. It's a live trilogy Blu-ray box set, which is a huge deal because Shout Factory has never been able to license from Warner Brothers. Hardly anybody has. About the only people that have been able to do it is Criterion. Criterion has put out some great stuff, but we don't know for sure. But that may mean that more titles could be coming, between the Warner Archive, between Criterion, between Shout Factory. There's a possibility that you're going to see a lot more Warner Brothers titles, deep catalog titles, out on Blu-ray, finally.
Definitely a topic for an entire show.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, we want to thank you guys for joining us on Talking Blue with the Digital Bits. Even though we didn't talk very blue, we did talk a lot of Blu-ray. Bill and Tim, I want to thank you especially for your time and joining us. And is there any exciting things coming to the bits that you would want to plug real quick? Or otherwise, just tell everybody where to join you over there at www.thedigitalbits.com, all one word, correct?
Yep, that's exactly right. Thedigitalbits.com. You can also find the Digital Bits on Facebook and Twitter, and you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. Also, I'm at Bill Hunt Bits on Twitter.
Tim?
And you can also find me on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Tim Salmons on Facebook, and I'm at Tim Salmons on Twitter. Pretty easy to find. So.
Sure, and if you want to get to know Tim a little better, we had an interview with him, and that link will be down below, along with the link to our very first quasi-pilot episode of Talking Blue, where we talked to Bill for quite a bit about the history of home media and all kinds of other stuff, and that link will be down below as well. Correct, Andre?
That is indeed correct.
And we look forward to doing many more of these with you guys.
Yes, this has been a lot of fun.
Likewise.
So for Andre and myself, Bill and Tim, I want to thank you once again for joining us on Talking Blue here on Midnight's Edge.
If you like this video, then please hit that subscribe button. Due to recent changes made by YouTube, we also encourage all of our subscribers, both new and old, to please hit that bell icon next to the subscribe button as well, so you will be notified when new videos are uploaded. Be sure to check back for news and analysis of the happenings and corporate politics behind the scenes of your favorite genre movies, as well as explorations of your favorite characters and their backgrounds and context here at Midnight's Edge.